on this computer. Hello. I remembered to push record, so we are doing awesome. And we, for those of you joining us on YouTube, I know my dad's there. I don't know if anyone else watches it, but we are.
Hi to your dad.
Hi to my dad. He watches these. We are on chapter 14, I think, in the book of Matthew.
Yes.
And we are going to hear today about death of John the Baptist, which is troublesome. And let's see, feeding the 5,000, Jesus walks on water. Should we just take the John the Baptist bit and then move on to kind of then do the feeding and healing as another section? Because I feel like they're kind of different topics. Yeah?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll go ahead and just read the first 12 lines. And then we'll see, we'll take it from there. If that sounds okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, wow, it's the glasses. I look authoritative. Okay. And I am reading from the NRSV. At that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead, and for this reason, these powers are at work in him." For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been telling him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Though Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised an oath to grant her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." The king was grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison. The head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took the body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. This is one the children's Bibles often skip. And if they do it in a little cartoon, it's very disturbing. So what do people think?
There must have been a great grievance on the part of Herodias to want the head of John the Baptist. I realized that she felt insulted, but I mean, it just seems the offense didn't fit the punishment.
Yeah, it's a pretty awful thing to ask for.
Yeah.
And to sort of pimp your daughter out to get. That's also sort of, there's just a lot of badness in this.
Because Salome was what, 12 or 13 years old at the time, And maybe there was just a lot more, bloody brutality of that type that people might have been a little desensitized to it or something. But I can't imagine a teenage girl, carrying this thing to her mother,
Yeah.
And there have been some pretty graphic depictions of that in films and artwork and whatnot over the years.
Yeah, or maybe people, especially people in positions of power, are sort of numb to suffering. I don't know. Anybody have thoughts?
Why did Herod believe that am I misreading this? Is he mistaking Jesus for John the Baptist in a few verses?
Where he rose from the dead?
Well, he says on one occasion, blah, 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 having heard of Jesus' reputation, exclaimed to his courtiers, "This man is John the Baptist." I don't know. Maybe that's ambiguous there.
Yeah, I mean, I think he would have known that he was part of the same group.
Yes.
that he was associated with him. And he would have known probably that John the Baptist was out in the desert
Right.
baptizing people.
But, you know, my copy, and it's almost the same words as yours, it says, this man is John the Baptizer. It is he in person raised from the dead. That is why such miraculous powers are at work in him. So it sounds to me like he is confusing Jesus and John the Baptist,
Yeah.
or maybe rationalizing that having killed John the Baptist, somehow John the Baptist was vindicated by being raised from the dead. I don't know.
I think it might refer to the fact that John the Baptist was referred to as Elijah raised from the dead. At least, obliquely, that's a reference earlier. That
Hmm.
that John the Baptist was a reincarnation of Elijah.
That's beautiful.
Okay.
That's what I'm like.
Hmm.
This. The piece of it.
Mhm.
It was unclear it's a Walmart.
And
So I got
Reading it in the message too, and it almost sounds like
this.
John the Baptist had been killed earlier. And then when Herod learned of Jesus,
Oh.
he said, "Oh, maybe this is John the Baptist resurrected."
I was just saying this.
Yeah.
Eli
Mhm.
wants an orchid.
Oh my god, I cannot do those things.
And I'm like,
Sorry, Jackie, I muted you. Yeah, but I feel like the age difference wouldn't, it's not like Jesus wasn't born until, I don't know. It's very confusing to me. If anyone has thoughts, please share them. We're gonna see if Greg left one of his reference books. But he didn't.
I was just
I
wondering,
only, go ahead, Mary. I'm sorry, Leslie.
that's okay, Mary can go.
No, I just heard a voice and misattributed it. So please, Leslie, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about John the Baptist, and of course, he and Jesus were the same age. Because we knew because Elizabeth was pregnant when Mary was pregnant. So, even though there are a few months separate, but I was just thinking, one of the things that what surprises me is the word name Herodias. Why is Herodias? Her name was Herodias, and is Herodias similar to like part of the family of Herod?
I think they
Is-
probably called her that because she was married to Herod.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think, I mean, it'd be quite a coincidence if she was born and named Herodias and then she married a Herod. It would be like our orchestra director, Shannon Shanahan. But I think that they might have called her Herodias as like another way to say wife of Herod.
But she
But-
was the wife of his brother Philip.
But maybe they changed her name when she,
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Sue.
maybe her name was changed when
Mhm.
she became Herod's wife.
This whole family there were brothers that were, the kingdom was separated, and the founder's name was Herod. So I think it might have something to do with like them all being part of the Herodian clan. But
That makes sense.
Okay, this might be a stupid question.
No, that's not stupid.
But like in a lot of movies and stuff, like depictions of like Jesus interacting with John and stuff, like we all know that they were related. Did they ever acknowledge that, like to each other, like, hey, that's my cousin John, and we're one big holy family? I don't know.
I know in the scene that I can think of, like from scripture, where they get together, it's where he baptizes
Right.
him, right? And he doesn't say, "Oh, you're my cousin." I don't
Like how that married him,
Right.
It's like, did they know that they were related? That's just
Yeah.
something I always wondered.
Yeah,
I
did
just
they
don't
play
mention.
together as little kids?
Yes.
You know?
miss you so much, but it's a lovely thought. Kind of both go off in the desert to like, I'm gonna go confront Satan. I'm gonna
Right.
go wear camel hair. I'll meet up later.
Yeah.
It's
I
a
don't know
lot.
if there was ever any mention or anything like that.
Not that I know of, but
Well, Jesus didn't have anything to do with that locust thing.
I wonder if there's anything in Josephus where he would have talked about something like that. I don't know.
Well, maybe David Schilling knows.
Let's- it's something one of us.
I was, I don't know specifically, you know, how about this particular family name, where this came from. I could look it up, but I don't know right off the bat.
Doesn't it strike you a little funny that this whole thing about eating locusts, evidently they didn't know that locusts and like shellfish are very closely related biologically.
Mhm.
You know, there's that injunction against eating shellfish, unclean.
Right.
So why isn't a locust unclean?
Yeah. Great source of protein. Use
I was
I
just gonna say,
The desert,
I was
you can't be picky about your culinary choices.
Yeah.
It could have been God saying, "Look at all I gave you."
Yeah, really.
Not a plate.
Thanks, God.
Yeah.
A little too crunchy for my taste.
Go ahead, David. Falling into chaos here.
Yes.
The issue we were talking about before about John the Baptist, later in Matthew, Jesus equates John the Baptist with Elijah, and I think what's going on here is that there was a common belief, a common saying, equating the mission of John the Baptist with Elijah and saying he was Elijah reincarnated. So I think that's kind of what's going on here about the whole thing about John the Baptist being supposedly resurrected from the dead. It was just what people were saying. As far as Herodias, I'm not sure, you know, how those names go. I'm not absolutely sure about but I think there were several Herods, and then there were sons of his that were called Herod. There was Herod the Great, there was Herod Antipater, and I think it might well have to do with a family name. So yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I found a footnote that says Herodias was never Philip's wife, but her second husband, Herod Antipas, was her half uncle, and therefore the marriage was not lawful.
Mm.
So I think this is just very sort of twisted and confused about who was with who,
Mhm.
and none of it really sounds very good.
Yeah, she was Herodias was a princess of the Herodian dynasty of Judea during the time of the Roman Empire. So she was part of the Herodian dynasty. So she probably derived her name from that fact.
Okay.
Maybe like being a Windsor or something.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That they're
it's a feminization of Herod, I think, probably.
Mhm. Mhm.
I always just felt like it makes Herod seem so weak. Like he's supposed to be this powerful figure, but he's like feels completely powerless to not have this man executed. That he just gives in to the pressure of his guests. He doesn't want to look bad. It seems like if you're the ruler, you could say, no, I'm not gonna do that if you didn't want to. But it's just a lack of character in my reading of it.
This is kind of twisted, because this might actually be his daughter. And so it's kind of a strange, very strange. But anyway, yeah, he was kind of bound. When the king makes a pronouncement like that before all the court, that he says, you know, whatever she asks, I'll give it to her. There was no way he could practically back down from that and maintain the same sort of power and authority that he had. He realized he had been trapped, and he was trapped by his lust for if I don't know if it was his stepdaughter or whatever, but anyway, that was really this is a very, very dark story in all its respects.
Yeah, anyone who tells a 13-year-old you can have whatever you want is in a bad spot. Well, shall we move on to something a little bit less grotesque?
Yes.
How about, it's not super long, would anyone just like to read to the end of the chapter? So we're looking at lines 14 through the end of 14.
I can do it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, 14, 13 to the end, right?
Yeah, so
Okay.
starting with now, when
Okay.
Jesus heard this.
As soon as Jesus heard the news, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds heard where he was headed and followed on foot from many towns. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. That evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "That isn't necessary. You feed them." "But we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here," he said. Then he told the people to sit down on the grass. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven, and blessed them. Then, breaking the loaves into pieces, he gave the bread to the disciples, who distributed it to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted, and afterward the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. About 5,000 men were fed that day, in addition to all the women and children. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that the disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I am here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you, walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshipped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. After they had crossed the lake, they landed at Gennesaret. When the people recognized Jesus, the news of his arrival spread quickly throughout the whole area, and soon people were bringing all of their sick to be healed. They begged him to let the sick touch at least the fringe of his robe, and all who touched him were healed.
Two of my favorite Bible stories right here.
Mhm. Yeah,
I had like a cleanser after that horrible
yeah.
preteen prostitution. So I had read something where it said the feeding of the 5,000 could have been less a miracle, which it could have been. He could have literally
Mhm.
multiplied things, but more like everybody, they said people in that day wouldn't have gone out for a day without bringing something with them, but everyone was kind of keeping it to themselves. And the miracle was that when everybody shared everything they actually had, then there ended up being more than enough for everyone. And we can take it either way, but I liked that interpretation because I was thinking about like during COVID when there wasn't enough toilet paper, but if we'd had a miracle where everybody really shared everything they had, there would have been more than enough for everybody. And the miracle's not really making more, it's like getting people to give more, which
really is a miracle in and of itself.
it's equally a miracle, honestly.
Especially when you consider at the beginning, when they first started looking for food, all they could come up with people who were willing to share was this one little boy who had this pittance. Everybody else was keeping it for themselves. But then, when the little boy shared, and Jesus blessed it, somehow that, if you're taking this interpretation, that it moved everybody to then start, chipping in with what they had. So that's a interesting story. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that it's the child again who's sort of
Yep.
child in my experience and opinion, children have a very clear sense of morality that then can get distorted as we worry about making mortgage payments or other issues. But for little kids, it's pretty clear. If I have 2 of these and he doesn't have any, it's fair to give him one.
Mhm.
So
David, is this recounted in other synoptic gospels? Because it really doesn't mention a child here. It says all we have is, at least in the version that I'm reading from. But I've heard that before, so I'm just
Yeah,
wondering if
maybe.
this story shows up in one of the other gospels.
It should be.
Yeah, it does. It does. And there's also a separate instance where they call, instead of the feeding of the 5,000, there's the feeding on the plain, which takes place in an area of Samaria, I believe, and it's a different number, but it's a similar kind of incident too. So this takes place in the synoptic, takes place in several different times, one of which does mention a child specifically. But yeah, but it doesn't here. You're right in Matthew itself. I was conflating those two.
Mhm.
It's interesting that there were 12 baskets left over. You can talk about whether there were literally 12 baskets or not, but that 12 is symbolic for several ways. There were 12 apostles, there were 12
Yeah.
tribes of Judah. So the 12 being left over had symbolism for the people there that where it occurred, that God's abundance, goes way beyond to include the whole people of Israel.
yeah, my text thinks that the 12 baskets probably symbolizes the 12 tribes of Israel,
Mhm.
and that it was a symbolic, like there was enough for everyone there, and there's also enough for everybody in Israel,
Hmm.
which is a lovely little image, isn't it?
What is your translation, Charity?
Mine's the NRSV, but I have this Harper Collins Study Bible. It's got good footnotes.
Hmm.
I never used to read the footnotes, but you guys encourage me.
Yeah.
Oh, in this version, in one of the footnotes, it says, the evangelist alludes to the Eucharistic mystery in the accounts of the multiplication of the loaves and of the walking on the water. So, I mean, he's saying this is saying that the loaves, are symbolic of the Eucharistic mystery.
If he looked up to heaven, he blessed and broke the
Broke it,
loaf.
right.
That sounds very familiar
Yeah.
to people who take communion.
Mhm.
I think it's interesting when you can take these simple stories that happen about Jesus or his parables, and you can interpret them and place them in different contexts and come to all kinds of different meanings that are very, interpretations that have a great deal of meaning. And I think it's the way we need to take a look at these New Testament passages and realize that they weren't just for one time and you have to achieve necessarily the absolute literal meaning what was going on, but what Matthew was trying to achieve, and Mark and Luke, they were telling these stories that had meaning far beyond just the contemporary context. You need to start with that, but then you can multiply that in many different directions and find meaning in a lot of different ways.
I know Richard Rohr he said that a lot of scholars think this. I just know what he says, but that there could have been 2 ministries. There could have been a loaves and fishes ministry in the early church, and there could have been a bread and wine ministry. And the church, like our church sort of organization, has kind of run with the bread and wine because it's easy to do in the context of a service. But the loaves and fishes would have been more like a table fellowship ministry, where it'd be like a potluck.
Mhm.
Because like the loaves and fishes would be a potluck dinner. And he says that there's evidence that the early churches had a lot of these, where everybody brought and shared. And your worship wouldn't necessarily be sitting and listening and then having a small cracker. your
Mhm.
worship would be sharing a meal and bringing things and sharing your food together.
Mhm.
And he thinks that that's still a really powerful way for people to worship, to sit and eat together.
Mm.
And I kind of like that. I think it's is always meaningful when you get together and have dinner with people.
Absolutely.
One
I
of
think
the,
Fellowship
that's,
at it.
go
Mhm.
ahead, please.
me,
Leslie?
okay.
Yeah.
I just have the Women's Bible open. And one of the things that one of the editors or the people who wrote some of the thought processes here is that these are two different times, parts of your life.
Oh,
The feeding of the feeding of the 5,000 was immediately okay when Matthew, Mark, and John, who are the other or the three places where they're found. I don't know. I think it's in Luke too, but it follows immediately the feeding of the crowd. Okay, the story of the storm follows the feeding of the crowd in all of the other these are three gospels, and that Jesus appeared in the midst of a dangerous storm and took command. So the first story reminds us that God provides manna or bread to Israel in the wilderness. And the second reminds us that God, the creator, is stronger than the forces of nature. The purpose of these stories is to reveal who Jesus is by identifying his actions with God's power. Storms come in many forms, however. For some, it's catastrophic loss or devastating illness. For others, it's the effect of the grinding poverty or violence. Whatever the storms we face, this story reminds us that Jesus appeared to his disciples when the storm was at its worst. It's easy to feel close to God on a beautiful spring day. This text reminds us to look for God when the storm is the worst and to listen for the words of deep encouragement. It's me, don't be afraid. And he says in Matthew in 27, verse 27. And even when we step out into the storm and our confidence falters, God is there to take our hand and walk us to safety. Sometimes the safety depends on the outcome of how we get through the storm. But
thank you, Leslie. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. It's very comforting.
In support of what you were talking about, Charity, about what Richard Rohr was saying, that two different meals, when we think about what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11 about how the rich were getting there first to church and they were sharing the meal with one another, the rich, and then when the other people who were poor and had to work finally got there was no food left over. So that's I think an affirmation of what Richard Rohr was trying to say, that there were two different meals, and sometimes the concept was abused. And I think this passage shows what Jesus' attitude was towards that, to show that it was supposed to be shared by all, for all, with abundance.
With abundance is always so key. And I forget it so quickly that I think, at least for me, it's always like, oh, what if we don't have enough? What if that fear, and that's like exactly opposite of everything he's about. Like, there's going to be plenty. There's going to be enough left over. The storm is not going to get you. I think it's very current and reassuring.
And I think it's so important to remember, because so often our religion can be shaped, or our lives can be shaped as if we're living in scarcity all the time. And when we look at lives of scarcity, then we fear and we try to gather as much for ourselves and our loved ones. And the gospel is constantly this gospel, this good news of abundance that God provides for all, and he provides it abundantly. We don't need to live in fear or in selfishness, but we can live with the attitude that God has abundance for all, and we just need to share and trust in him. And in that way, his abundance can provide for us all.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's a cartoon that hopefully none of you have seen because it's really not very good, but having little kids, you watch these terrible movies. It's called Boss Baby, and Alec Baldwin plays a baby who is also an executive.
Yeah.
You don't think about it too much. But the main thing is that there's a little boy and he gets this baby brother. And he's got to figure out, like, how are we going to do this now that there's two kids? And like his parents used to sing him to sleep, and now they don't because they're busy. He's kind of struggling with this. And I don't know, forces in the movie tell him that there's only so much love. And they have one of those little bead toys you've seen on high chairs.
Mhm.
He's like, there's this much love for you and the baby. And look at the baby gets all of them. And there's no love left for you. And then at the end, the kind of like conclusion is that love's not like beads, and all these beads come pouring down from the sky. And I'm like, there's beads for everybody. We just make more beads. When the baby was born, we just make more beads. There's no shortage of beads. And the little boy's like, and he's in like up to his neck in beads. And it's, I mean, terrible movie, but I kind of love that image. And I always feel like I'm going to keep my fish because there's only so many beads. And this keeps saying like, no, we make more beads. There's enough.
Mhm.
And I don't know. It's so human to start to go in a scarcity mindset.
I like that, Charity. There's a meme that I see rotating around that goes, equal rights for others does not mean less rights for you. It's not pie. It's
Not
not pie.
Not pie.
Right.
It's not. It's loaves and fishes. And
Yeah.
we haven't really talked about walking on the water though, which is also just a beautiful image.
Mm.
Does anyone have
Well, let me
thoughts?
let me interject a note of levity about that one. Some of you may have seen, there is also a cartoon that I've seen on Facebook that shows Mary kneeling next to a bathtub full of water and Jesus standing on top of the water, and the voice bubble in Mary is saying, "Get in." It's a very cute cartoon.
Oh, the idea of toddlers that could do miracles.
Yeah,
is
right,
terrifying. It changes it all to wine. Oh, it's gonna be a mess.
Yeah.
That's why we don't hear about his childhood years.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Peter's so funny in this to me. Like he's just so impulsive. Like he's
Right.
like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna jump out and I'm gonna walk to you. And then it's like he hasn't thought the whole thing through.
Right.
Because when you're actually doing it, you're like, oh wow, what am I doing? This is
Mhm.
scary.
Mhm.
And when he's just living in the moment and just motivated by wanting to get to Jesus,
Mhm.
like he can do anything. And then you're sort of like, oh gosh, what'd I get into?
Mhm.
Is this gonna work? And you doubt, like you leapt, and now you're like, now I'm in this situation. And I love that he gets to have his moment of doubt, and he's still okay. You don't have to stay in that initial. I think sometimes for VBS we're doing the parable of the sower, and I'm trying to think of a craft, so it's on my mind right now. But like there's the one seeds that get planted and they grow quickly, but they're not planted deeply enough. So they don't last.
Wither and die.
They wither and die.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about faith journeys, that sometimes it's easy, especially in sort of the more charismatic
Mhm.
bass guitar band
Mhm.
churches that I've been to and enjoyed, to have this initial flush of like, I'm in it.
Mhm.
And then you've got to go walk your walk and live your life. And it's easy to jump out of the boat. And then sometimes it's really hard to then be like, okay, what's really important to me? What do I really value? The winds are high.
Mhm.
And we all are kind of, I don't know, I identify in a faith journey with this, and that you're allowed to have your moments of doubt and you're allowed to sink, but he doesn't let go. So,
So according to this though, like he did get out and start walking on water towards
Yeah.
Jesus, right? Okay. And
Yeah.
the winds whipped up is when he got afraid.
he started like, whoa, gosh.
That reminds me of a story my sister just told me. I texted me yesterday, last couple of days. They've been having a lot of storms down in Georgia, and her cat that is been staying out in there. They have a screened-in porch, and the cat's been sitting out there. But this last storm was really bad, and so Laura went out to check on the cat, and the cat was just like looking to her for like, do I need to, help? And it just seemed like that Laura was Florida's protector. And it was like he was looking towards, she was looking towards Laura for, oh, come here, and Laura did bring her in to the house so that, because she looked a little bit frightened. But she says when it's like an easy storm or quiet rain or something, she just loves being out there in the porch. But this last one, that trees had fallen and all sorts of stuff. So it was pretty bad. But anyway, I was thinking about Laura's story and how the little kitty was looking to her for
Or
help.
has that seen a toddler when they fall and they like look to their parent, like, am I okay? Am I hurt?
Mhm.
And you learn so quickly to be like, you're hurt.
Yeah.
When my kids would fall, I'd be like, you're safe. Good job. Like you slid into home or something.
And if you do the opposite response, then the kid might start wailing. And
Exactly.
oh, maybe I am hurt.
Yeah. It's like this, I just fell and I don't know if I'm okay or not.
Yeah.
And so you like look to someone else. And so Peter falls and he's got Jesus to look to.
Mhm.
Jesus is like, yeah, you're okay. Yeah, come on up, bud. Let's go get.
Well, you could mine this
love it.
one parable, you could mine it for all kinds of symbolic meaning. I mean, truth be told, if there was a raging storm going on and all these huge waves and all that, who in their right mind would ever leave a boat?
Yeah.
There are certain things you can trust God, but I wouldn't. I mean, maybe, I guess I'm the man of little faith, but I would not. If they're saying that there are 15-foot waves and really strong rip currents, am I going to defy that and go swimming anyway? No. So I don't know.
Yeah.
And it also, it really speaks to Peter's humanity. He was afraid.
Yeah.
That, and we all do. I mean, that's hardwired into us.
Mhm.
When you're facing that much danger, so I don't know.
Well, they were afraid right from the very beginning. They weren't just afraid of the storm, but they didn't know for sure who was coming walking towards them, because regular people can't just walk on the wind and the waves. They thought maybe Jesus was a ghost.
Right.
In the text, they thought maybe a spirit or a demon or something like that, and they were scared of him. And Jesus spoke to him and told him not to be afraid. And Peter said, "Well, prove it to me then. If you can do it, show me I can do it too." And he just stepped out, and he was doing it for a while, and then he just looked around and said, "I can't be doing this." And Jesus immediately rescued him. So this is so reassuring to all of us, that if we lose our faith, it's not like Jesus says, "Well, you didn't trust in me, sink or swim," but he immediately reached out, and saved him, and so that's just reassuring to me anyway. Yeah.
I can kind of identify with that in my own experience, because if you get a cancer diagnosis, I mean, God gave me an idea when this first happened, and I thought, for just a moment, I thought, oh, I can't go through this. I might as well, give up. And then I saw that, I could trust God for, walk on water right now today. And that was really a real revelation for me, that, you're here in the present moment, and don't be sure that it's not going to work out, or because if it doesn't work out, you're still going to be with God. And so I can kind of identify with Peter in that situation. And now I'm able to, I don't spend all day worrying about the future at all. And I don't take credit for that, but it's like this happened. And maybe there are other people that have had experiences like that where they could choose to either freak out or just say, okay, I'm going to trust God now. And in this moment, I see all kind of reasons why God is with me. They surround me if I start counting them. And so anyway, I just realized that I was looking at that and kind of studying it and thinking, oh, I can really identify.
Hmm.
Oh, thank you. I love
Peter
hearing that.
really,
Go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
I'm just gonna say real quick, Peter really is every man. He
Yeah.
represents the best of us. He represents the worst of us. He just represents being very human, and everybody can identify with Peter, and everybody knows somebody that's like that too. But but anyway, it's so reassuring when you see the way that Jesus works with Peter and the way Peter responds. He's just so human, and it's so reassuring to take a look at where Peter comes from, all the things he does, good and bad. And yet, Jesus trusts starting his church to Peter with, the ministry in Acts with the, so that's just a really good example. I think whether Peter is one person or whether he's a type or whatever, anyway, it's a really reassuring way of, looking at it.
Because he's the rock, right?
Rocks sink.
Rock sink. Maybe
Yeah,
that's
we don't
wrong.
want to be.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. It is 11:30. I know people have other things they need to go do, but thank you for sharing this hour with us. And
We have one chapter left, so this is a great stopping point. There's just one chapter left.
you left. Well,
Don't we?
no, a couple.
Oh,
Let's
a
see.
couple. Oh, yeah.
We got 26.
17.
Oh,
You-
I missed counting.
You know what? If you want to stop, you can, but I think we'll keep on trucking.
No. I didn't realize. Oh, it really does
Yeah.
go further. What made me think that was the end? Okay, never mind.
It doesn't get any better than Peter walking on water.
Never mind.
Mark, the book that is really short, that only has 15 to 16 chapters.
Well, I will be here again next week. I think Greg is also back. And
I'll be back.
and we'll be back.
Kansas City, yeah. Mhm.
And join us if you can. Otherwise, we'll be here every week.
Yep.
So
Okay.
thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Thank you for sharing your time and stories with us.
You have
Take
a
care,
great week
everyone.
too, Charity.
Have a great week, everyone. God
Bye.
bless.
Bye, Pam.
Bye.
Mary,
Bye.
Leslie. Bye, Leslie.
bye. Mary, have a good trip.
Bye. Okay.
Thank you.